In this video, I will be showing you how to make some homemade PCBs. And in the grand scheme of this project or video series, really, we're going to be making these Hudson Sidecar clones. Those are two I'd already made. The first part of this is going to be making the PCB there, doing all the holes, and then the second part will be putting the components on, soldering it up, wiring it up. And then probably the third part will be the stomp box itself and how to etch that. And then, yeah, putting it all together. These layouts are done by a person named Storyboardist. I'll link to the website that they're on. I'm not sure if it's their website, but they have a lot of schematics for different pedals. And it's super nice because they have the masking for the images that we want. So in order to do this, you're going to want distilled water, sodium hydroxide, 100% pure sodium hydroxide, muriatic acid, and hydrogen peroxide. You will also want a resin 3D printer, some pre-sensitized photo-positive PCB boards, resin printer. So you can do this with a couple of different mixes of acids. I prefer this mixture just because it's easy to get your hands on. A lot of people do ferric chloride, which is arguably a little safer, just in the fumes alone. But yeah, I prefer this mixture just because it's easy to get your hands on muriatic acid and hydrogen peroxide. So to start, we're going to put about 200 grams of distilled water into our container. I'm going to use a plastic spoon to kind of mix that together. You don't have to be exact here, like don't shoot exactly for 200 grams. You just want enough water that you can kind of submerge the board in whatever tub you're using. And then I'm going to use here about 3 grams of sodium hydroxide. Again, it can kind of be loose. I would say that you probably want to go lower on the sodium hydroxide side, just because um, if it's too alkaline in your water, you'll over remove the film. You'll get like some weird pitting. The other thing you want to be sure of here is to make sure you mix every granule into the water. If you have any floating granules and they happen to find your way onto your board after you put it in there, you will ruin the film layer. For this video, I'm not really going to include how I converted the files. There's like 3 different ways to do it for this specific printer. And this printer is kind of a piece of junk. I got it super cheap on sale, and I tried to do some resin printing, and long story short, I don't like resin printing at all. It's messy and stinky. So this sort of just sat in the garage forever until I realized I could use it to make some PCBs. So there is quite a process to converting it to the right file. I used Inkscape, made SVGs, and then I used a guy's program on GitHub called SVG to STL, and I'll link that also. And then from the STL, you use, I think it's called Chitu box, Chitu box. I don't know. I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of that. And that takes it from an STL to what is a PWMA file, and I think that's specific to the Anycubic printer. And that's really why I'm not including any of that part of this process, because I'm going to guess it varies a ton by the type of printer. So yeah, once you take your board, and you want to buy a 1/32 FR4 photopositive pre-sensitized boards to do it this particular way. There are some other ways to do this using an inkjet printer, or not an inkjet, excuse me, a laser jet printer, and dry negative film. I don't have a regular printer, so that's just not something I'm not gonna buy a regular printer to do that. But the 1/32 FR4 is fairly important going forward. It just makes your life much easier than getting 1/8 FR4 boards. They're just too thick, and you're going to end up fighting them a little bit. So in this case, I'm going to expose this for about 2 minutes. And you want to make sure when you do this whole process, it's best to do it at night and make sure that you are in a room that doesn't have unnecessary UV exposure. What I mean by that is here in the office, I have LED bulbs and I'm doing this. It's, completely dark outside. If you happen to expose the board after you peel the film off to UV light, you'll create kind of almost like a sunburst around the sides, which you really just don't want to do. So it's best to do it at night. Make sure you limit your UV exposure by using LED bulbs. All kinds of different bulbs emit UV light. You just want to avoid that. So LED lights, do it in the dark. Make sure you tape it down. And that should limit your UV exposure to exactly what you want, which is directly onto the PCB. A lot of these resin printers have like a hood that goes over the top, and there's a sensor on the back that kind of prevents you from operating it with the hood off. I just got around that by putting some electrical tape on the sensor on the back, and that seems to work. Obviously, don't stare into the UV light while you're testing it. That's why they have those hoods on there. Not good for your eyes. So once you get your board off here, you're basically good to go right into your sodium hydroxide water mix. There's not a great way to tell that you did this correctly until you put it in there. It'll become obvious almost immediately. Within the first probably 2-3 seconds, you should see some lifting of the film. And you can kind of shake it around in here. What'll end up happening is the film will kind of liquefy, and you want to just sort of let it liquefy. As you move it around, try not to touch it. It should be okay, but it's best not to agitate it more than it needs to. What I like to kind of do is I'll let it sit for a little bit till it kind of changes color. I'll pick it up, let it drip off, put it back in. And this process won't take very long. And you don't want to leave it in here any longer than you have to. So it's good to kind of shake it around, pick it back up, let it drip. And at the point that you can see that all your traces and your lines are the way that you want, take it out. Like I said, you really don't want to leave it in here any longer than you have to. Just because we need that film to survive as much as possible for the next part. You can see me kind of shaking it around here, getting the last little bit to kind of liquefy off of there. Okay, good to go. That looks about like what we want. I'm going to put this down, dump the lye water mixture out, and then we're going to mix our muriatic acid 2 parts to 1 part hydrogen peroxide. In this case, I'm just using a cup, so it'll be 1 cup muriatic acid, half a cup of hydrogen peroxide. What you're really doing here is adding kind of an oxidization process to the muriatic acid. This is a mostly safe process. There are little bubbles that will be created, and those are chlorine gas, which is not great. But you'll see here shortly, it's a pretty small amount. I would recommend doing this in a well-ventilated area. In here I have, a ceiling fan, and I've got the furnace air on while I do this, and that circulates the air pretty good for the most part. So this process is going to take a while. And what you're really looking for here is the copper will turn kind of from the shiny orange that to more of like a spicy mustard orange, kind of a stone ground mustard orange, if you will. And it does take a long time. You can speed this process up by heating up the acidic mixture. I really don't do that, mostly because of the off gas that comes off of this. You'll speed that up as well, which isn't great. And if you get it too agitated, when these bubbles start to come up, they actually have a chance of lifting the film if it's too aggressive. And what you don't want to do is undercut your film by etching the copper underneath of it. That will ruin your traces for sure, especially if they're really thin like these are. So you can see here, we're starting to kind of get some of that dark brown color I was talking about in the top left of that right PCB. You can also see some of the bubbling happening. So this is sort of the beginning of the process here. Once you have this going on, you know that you have about the right mixture of acidity. And you can add some extra hydrogen peroxide on top. I'll do that probably in a few minutes here. Just to sort of speed it up a little bit. Just depends upon, you know, what you're trying to do. And yeah, you're basically now just waiting for it. This will happen pretty slowly. You can kind of agitate it, shake it around. That'll sort of help. And you can see here some of those bubbles. Yeah, keep in mind those are chlorine gas as a byproduct of this, so really not great to be inhaling. You should kind of stay away from it as much as you can. You can see me kind of fanning it away there. It's pretty obvious that, you know, there's probably too much chlorine gas. It smells horrid, like rotten eggs. So yeah, well ventilated area. And realistically, it's not a ton of it, so it's not that bad. But kind of keep your eye on it and make sure you don't, you know, don't close the door and then not have a fan on. You'll end up in trouble. So you can see here that we're basically at the end. We got one little spot left. And honestly, if you're making these and you're just kind of doing some prototyping, no problem. That's probably fine. I, you know, I'm here. I might as well make it picture perfect for this video. So I just kind of kept it going. You can see me shaking out the last little bit of it there. And really what we're looking at now is all of our copper we want to keep is underneath the film. And what is left that you can see is kind of translucent there is the fiberglass underneath of the copper clad board. So that looks pretty good. Our traces look nice and clean. I'm going to dump this out. And then we should be good to go. So what I'm going to use here is acetone or nail polish remover. You can use just about any solvent. You can use rubbing alcohol if you happen to have that. I prefer acetone. It works really fast, and it works pretty well. And yeah, it's cheap. So that should wipe off nice. What you don't want to do here is touch the shiny surface too much. Don't wipe it off. Just let the acetone evaporate on its own. If you like dab it with a paper towel, you will leave the texture of the paper towel in the copper surface. I've done that. You really don't want to do that. So it's best to just let it sit. And yeah, you have your PCBs. These are ready to cut. Just one quick look at the traces here. Everything looks pretty good. Yep. So then what we're going to do from here is we're going to cut it. And the reason that I like to buy 1/32 FR4 boards is they're really thin and you can actually just score them with like a box knife, which is what we're going to use here. I like to use a little bit of painter's tape to kind of make my lines nice and pretty. You'll see me scoring it here. What you really don't want to do is be cutting this with a saw. FR4 fiberglass is well, it's fiberglass, and really fiberglass of any kind. The dust is not good. It's very bad for your lungs, and if you're going to do anything sanding wise, wear a mask. That's all I can say. I avoid it as much as possible. And I like to just sort of break the pieces off, and they will score pretty nicely. You can see me using a pair of vice grips here. If you don't have enough leverage, you can see me kind of fighting it. Just be careful here. You don't want to over reef on it because you can actually crack the fiberglass and the PCB part you want to keep, which will crack the copper clad layer and potentially ruin your circuit board. And if you just spent, an hour and a half, 2 hours watching the acid eat it away, you're going to be pretty mad if you crack your circuit board. So be patient, wiggle it back and forth. It will break if you score it correctly, and sort of spend some time working it back and forth. So I'm just going to finish this up here, sort of breaking these off. And by the end of this, we should have 2 identical PCBs. And they should be in pretty good shape. But yeah, like I said, you can sand these. I don't. These are going to end up in a guitar pedal case, stomp box. It's really not going to matter. And for me, it's not worth it to mess with the fiberglass. I really hate fiberglass, if you can't tell. So ideally, you just kind of want to score it. If you score it cleanly, or as clean as possible, it's going to be good enough. I got to be honest. If you're doing, something else and you just happen to be watching this video because you want to make really nice PCBs for a different project, then sure, maybe spend the time, but I would strongly encourage a dust mask. Just, yeah, it's something about fiberglass is just not good for you, obviously. So we're going to get this last little bit broken off here. And the next stage of this is going to be drilling the holes. And that is likely going to be the most laborious stage of this. There's a lot of holes, as you can see. And it's a pretty small drill bit. So there they are. So this is sped up about 8 times. What I have here is a jewelry drill. It's basically a 0.8 millimeter bit in the end of like a screwdriver handle. You want about 0.8 millimeters. You can do a little more, a little less. Our solder through components are gonna be, I think, generally in the range of like 0.7 millimeters. So as long as your hole's slightly bigger than that, you should be okay. And yeah, this takes a long time. And you can see that we're going to make a little bit of fiberglass dust here, but this is why I do it by hand. Well, for 2 reasons. If you're using a 0.8 millimeter bit and you apply too much torque to it, you're going to break it. So doing it by hand, it's a lot easier to feel that. As well as you keep the dust down, which is ideal. And you really want to be careful here. Like, make sure you line it up. You don't have to push very hard. You don't have to drill for very long. Fiberglass is pretty soft when you are drilling it out like this. So be patient. It's going to take you a while, but it's worth it. Just to keep kind of the dust down and make your holes nice. It'll save you some pain later. So you can see here we're basically done. We're ready to solder some components into it. You got all your holes there. We have our traces on the back. And yeah, this is ready for components and solder, which will be in the next video. I appreciate you watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.